Hello everyone and welcome to another Endgame episode with Coach B from masterchess.com. This is the third and last video in the series of bishops of opposite colors, and in this video we're going to take a look at the pawns being separated by 3 or more files. Pawns separated by 3 or more files increase the winning chances dramatically. You will either have a pawn on a knight file and a pawn on the bishop's file, or a pawn on the rook's file and a pawn on the central file. With the pawn on a rook file that will queen on the same color as his bishop, the game is usually won. With the pawn on the knight file, games can be won. However, drawing chances arise if the pawn on the knight file is well advanced, as black is going to be able to set up a blockade, preventing outflanking from happening. So let's take a look at these drawing scenarios first. So in this first scenario, we could see that white has 2 pawns separated by 3 files, but the pawn on the knight file is on the 7th rank, so it's well advanced, while the pawn on the bishop's file is on the 5th rank. This is actually the most favorable position for a defense setup, so here black can draw. If the pawn on the 5th rank would be more advanced, on the 6th or 7th rank, white would be able to win easily. However, with the knight pawn on the 7th rank and the bishop's pawn on the 5th rank, black can set up a blockade. For this blockade to work, black's bishop needs to be able to sit on the square right in front of the pawn on the knight's file. From here, black's bishop attacks the square a7 and all the squares on the c7 to h2 diagonal, making it very difficult for the white king to penetrate, especially that the black king also covers the square g5. The only breakthrough can happen via the h file through the square h5, or on the diagonal on the lie squares via the square d7. However, black's king will be able to prevent white from reaching those squares. So let's take a look at the best try for white. Here, after king to f3, white is trying to penetrate via the h5 square. So black needs to be careful, he cannot allow outflanking from happening. Here, the correct response will be king to g5, blocking white from reaching that square. Coming back, if black makes a mistake and makes a waiting move here, let's say bishop to c7, now white is able to win this game. He's going to move the king to g4, running towards the square h5, and black cannot prevent white from outflanking him. After something like bishop to b8, king to h5, bishop to f4, trying to block the white king from reaching the square h6, well, now white can move the bishop to c8, and black is in zugzwang. He has no good move. If he moves the king to g7, well, after this, white will move the king to g4, attacking black's bishop. After bishop to b8, king to g5, taking the opposition and threatening to move the pawn to f6. After bishop to e5, trying to prevent this, white can still move the pawn to f6 with check. And now, if the bishop takes the pawn, white can move the king to f5. And now the only way to stop the pawn from promoting on b8 is bishop to e5, from which white can simply capture the bishop, winning the game. Coming back after f6 check, if black does not take the bishop, let's say he's going to move the king to f7, blocking that pawn. Well, after bishop to g4, bishop to b8, king to f5, bishop to c7, the bishop could come on h5 check, moving the king away. And after something like king to f8, the white king can penetrate between the pawns with king to e6. After something like bishop to b8, king to d7, and white will be able to win this game. And I'm just going to fast forward through the moves. And now black is totally lost. White is simply going to promote the pawn on b8, capturing black's bishop, while the black king cannot get to the pawn on f6, as he attacks the square e7 and g7, and the bishop on h5 attacks the square f7, creating a wall so that the black king cannot get to it. So the only thing that black has here is bishop to b8. After king takes the bishop, white is winning the game. Coming back from the very beginning, we saw that after bishop to c7, a waiting move, white was able to win with king to g4. After bishop to b8, king to h5, bishop to f4, and bishop to c8, we looked at the king moving to g7. If black here tries instead just retreating the bishop, let's say bishop to b8, allowing the white king to go to h6, white is still winning. And I'm just going to fast forward through the moves. and here white will win the game. But coming back from the very beginning, after king to f3, black can see that white is trying to reach the square h5, so the correct response is king to g5, blocking him from reaching that square. And now the white king is not able to outflank the black king. So all he's got is trying to penetrate on the other side. After king to e4, king to f6, king to d5, here black can do a waiting move, bishop to g3, king to c6, and now king to e7. Black needs to make sure that when the white king reaches c6, he is able to cover the square e7, blocking the white king from penetrating between the pawns. After king to b6, bishop to b8, and white cannot make any progress and a draw is achieved. This next example is very similar to the previous example. The only difference we have is that the pawns have moved one rank down. Even in this case, black can still achieve a draw with correct play. If his bishop is able to attack or stand on the square right in front of the pawn when the pawn is on the 6th rank, he's going to be able to use the king to prevent white from penetrating. Obviously, white will try to penetrate with the king via the f2 to h4 diagonal, or he's going to try to use the dark squares to come in between the pawns. But with correct play, black is able to hold on to this position. What black needs to do here is first of all move the bishop to b7, from which he's going to control a lot of the light squares. He controls the square a6 and all the squares from the c6 to h1 diagonal. After this, white will respond with king to g3, trying to outflank the black king and penetrating into the position. And now black will respond with king to f5. And after king to h4, here black needs to be very careful. The correct response will be king to g6, preventing white from breaking through. Coming back, if black makes the mistakes of moving the bishop to f3 here, thinking that he's going to prevent white from breaking through as he's attacking the square h5 and the black king attacks the square g5, black has to be super careful. After bishop to c7, the only move that will draw the game still is moving the king to g6. If he makes the mistake of retreating the bishop, let's say bishop to b7, allowing the king to get on h5, now white is able to win this game. And I'm just going to fast forward to the moves so you could see how white will win. And here, after bishop to c6, even though it looks like he's able to stop white as he's attacking the square e8 and the king attacks the square e7 from penetrating through, after bishop to e5, black is in zugzwang. Black doesn't have any good moves. The square d6 and f6 are taken away by the white bishop. If the black king is trying to prevent white from going to the pawn on the b file with king to d7, then white will simply be able to march the pawn on the f file using the king to help it promote. And if black instead will move the bishop to b7, this will allow king to e8 and white will win the game. And I'm just going to fast forward through the moves. And here white is winning. But coming back after king to h4, if black responds with king to g6 here, white cannot make any progress. After something like king to g4, black can play bishop to c8 check. And then there's only two options. If white tries to push the pawn to f5 as in the previous example, here this doesn't work because after the bishop takes the pawn and king to f4, the bishop has enough time to retreat to c8 to block the pawn from reaching the b7 square. And this game is drawn. All that black needs to do is move the bishop to b7 and then stay on this diagonal to sacrifice for the pawn when it reaches b7. And coming back, if instead of pushing the pawn to f5, white simply retreats with king to f3, black is going to respond with bishop to b7. And no better is trying to penetrate through the pawns. For example, after something like king to e3, black will respond king to f5, king to d4, king to e6. After bishop to e5, king to f5. King to c5, trying to penetrate through. After king to e6, white is blocked and he cannot penetrate between the pawns. Therefore, a draw is achieved. And this concludes the first part of the video when the pawns are separated by 3 files. Please stay tuned for the second part where we're going to see what happens when the knight pawn is not further advanced and how white will be able to win that game. We're also going to take a look at strategies that we can implement when pawns are separated by 4 or more files. And I encourage you to visit my website masterchess.com where you'll be able to practice these positions against the computer. All you have to do is go on my website masterchess.com, click on Endgame versus Computer, and then opposite color bishops. And then you'll be able to practice these positions against the computer. Thank you for watching and have a great day.